This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. My good buddy Keith at 5 Watt World uploaded a video yesterday called Great Guitars That It Sucks to Own. And it's kind of a really interesting concept to me, and I sent him an email and said, great video, really enjoyed it, and I thought since he used my playing in it, I'd use his idea and kind of do a video similarly, kind of not using his exact reasons, because if you watch this video, there's actually some really cool stuff in there, I think, worth a look, and some really interesting thoughts. So check that video out. This video is going to be kind of my take on it in a slightly more general kind of thing. So gear that it sucks to own and why some of these things might be negative. As Keith said, this is just kind of my thoughts on this stuff, and if you have different takes and reasons that you love some of this stuff, then do feel free to jump in the comments and share that with folks as well. Of course, gear stuff is all intensely personal, and what I'm doing is kind of a lot of it based on the fact that I've got a kid that's a year old, and also sort of growing up fairly poor, and also having a mortgage. So that's kind of my context, if you know what I mean. And also kind of trying to be responsible in a way that, I recognise that I get told sometimes by people, I bought this piece of gear because I saw you kind of playing it, and that to me felt a little bit odd, if you know what I mean, as I kind of never really set out to be an influencer. I just want to play guitar and kind of do videos about playing guitar. So on with the video. The first thing, this showed up in Keith's video, for me, is guitars that are too good. So it sounds like a bit of a weird problem, but this one for me is the guitar that I would kind of play every single day But the problem with that is that guitars start to wear, right? And you have to then get a fret job on them. And as my buddy Tony can attest, fret jobs can be kind of variable. And as Keith mentioned in the video, finding a tech that you trust with your favorite instruments is not that easy to come by. So for me, this guitar has sat in the cupboard in a case for quite a while, not because there's anything wrong with it, because I'm feeling that I'm just overplaying it and the frets are wearing quicker than I'd like and all of that sort of stuff. So I have to save this for special occasions, and I don't gig this guitar anymore just because I get worried about what might happen. This is my K-line that I bought for about £850 off of the Fretboard Forum in the UK. I have plenty of other K-lines, and you see me playing the yellow one quite often at the moment. So yeah, this one I've sort of semi-retired. I think Philip Sace has obviously way more expensive guitars, 63 Strats I think, and similarly he has got made, well, not saying that any of the logic is similar to mine, but you've seen him sort of put those away for special occasions. And I think that's one thing that sucks about kind of having a number one, is that you have to kind of make the realization that you could severely alter that guitar if you change the frets and stuff like that. And that for me is a little bit of a fear that I have about this one, and the reason I've kind of scaled back my playing on it. Another thing that I kind of changed my mind on, because for a while there was this idea on the channel that I would kind of try and search out some really good for the money gear, and the thing about cheaper guitars is, as great as they might be, you end up, I think, kind of accumulating them, and they kind of sit for me as a reminder that these guitars are great, but I've got better ones that I play more of the time. The cheap guitar thing, I think, in many ways can be a really good thing, because things like, I say cheap guitar, that means different things for different people, but like the Sire Larry Carlton stuff, which is, you know, sort of around the £500 mark, I think that mid kind of price thing, or I think the PRS DGT SE is no longer really, that's not a cheap guitar, but for a PRS it's cheap, if you get what I mean. Those are my two kind of favourite cheaper guitars, but you know, like the PRS DGT SE was more expensive than my, you know, boutique built K-line. So not really cheap, but you get what I mean. That's what I tried to get away from, is having, you know, the room taken up with guitars that are just good for the money, and actually instead just having guitars that are good for the sake of being good. If that, you get the difference with that. And yeah, I think the collector side of me, or whatever it is, like the spendy side, the side of me that gets marketed to, likes the idea of a bargain, likes the idea of a cheaper guitar, but I also don't want to have loads and loads of guitars for no reason, because I don't have that much space. So for me, it's become a thing where I'm happy to review these guitars and buy them to review them, but I don't hold on to them and hoard them for too long, because I don't want necessarily a room full of guitars that I thought were really good for the money, but that day to day I'm not necessarily as inspired to pick up. The PRS DGT SE stays, because I do really get inspired by that. The Sire Larry Carlton Gold Top stays, again, because that one, I get inspired by that one, as I have the last couple of days. Expensive guitars goes on my list because there's a couple of examples where, for me personally, I couldn't ever really bond with the guitar, because all I ever thought about was how much money I had tied up in it at a time when I probably shouldn't have had an expensive guitar. I think it would have been lockdown-ish. I bought a PRS DGT Wood Library just because I'd never had one. One came up, Dave, who lent me the PRS Silver Sky, which sort of the two guitars, I kind of regret not spending more time with the Silver Sky, because looking back, that's the guitar that stood out to me. I had the DGT for about a year, and eventually I moved it on to Guitar Giveaway, which is like a Somerset based kind of semi-raffle draw thing. But that guitar kind of just sat in the cupboard, and I felt kind of guilty about it, because it didn't seem to me to jive with whatever I've got going on personally, where I feel like I tried to get things that are good value for money, and that one to me didn't seem particularly like a special guitar. For whatever reason, I didn't bond with it, and I think part of it was because of the price, part of it maybe that guitar specifically didn't speak to me, but it felt just like a guilty weight something weird, maybe a little bit Catholic about that. But I was quite happy to move that one on. That's the most expensive guitar I've ever bought. That's a feeling for me, like an expensive guitar doesn't really seem to suit me that well. I'm going to do a video about this, buy an R8 once, and that was exactly, I bought, it was like $3,500 or something like that, and I had an overwhelming feeling of like, this is too much money for me personally in my situation to have invested in a guitar, invested in inverted commas, but so that for me, really expensive guitars, of course, again, that is going to be a moving thing for personal people, but sort of like 1,500 to 1,800 for me has been the limit that I'm comfortable spending on a guitar. I don't know if that is different for you guys, so let me know in the comments. But buying used is always my preference. So yeah, that expensive guitars that are kind of just sit on your shoulders for me is a thing. Is a real kind of thing that I think kind of sucks to own: heavy amps. And this kind of sucks because they sound incredible, some of them. So like the Mesa Boogie Mark III that I had, the hardwood, one of the most fun amps that I ever gigged, but it weighed 32 kilograms, and yeah, it had an EV speaker in it, hardwood kind of Mesa, beautiful thing, looked incredible, but because it was so heavy, it was just difficult to justify keeping around. And similarly, I have a Fender Pro Reverb 1965 back here that the owner, who may or may not have been someone Gilmore, it's difficult to confirm, but there are two EV speakers in it and the transformers were changed. That similarly, two EV speakers in one amp, you can imagine, is incredibly heavy, and for that reason this doesn't really leave the house either, because my spine cannot cope with that sort of activity. So heavy amps for me, it's a total love-hate thing, where it's like I love the sound of these things. For some reason a heavy amp seems to sound right? And I think people definitely do say that transformers and all that stuff make a difference. Definitely speakers make a difference, and the EV speaker to me sounds incredible, but when the amp is super heavy, it's not really a vibe, right? And this Two-Rock is a little bit like that too. Along with the amps being heavy, that kind of sucks. I've got this 1965 Pro Reverb. It kind of sucks because I took it twice to get repaired. Once by a guy in, Sherborne, and once by a guy in Exeter. And yet still, when I turn it on, sometimes it's got a lot of crackle. I think what it might be is that the reverb tank is kind of corroded, maybe because it's an outside wall kind of here. It's not an ideal position for it to be kept. Let me know your thoughts on that if you've got any. But having amps that seem to always need repair or are never quite right, that kind of sucks as well. I never really had that with any of the Mesa Boogies that I've owned, and I've owned, I don't know, probably 10, something like that. Never had an issue really with any of them, except for a reverb that stopped working on my Nomad 45. And as much as I prefer the clean tone out of this Fender amp, the Pro Reverb from 1965, it kind of sucks that I can't really rely on it even to turn on without making an obnoxious amount of crackle, so that kind of sucks. The last thing that I kind of thought on my list was expensive pedals that I equally started to just feel guilty about having, because for me I use modelers so much, and maybe modelers kind of suck, because what it has made me kind of reflect on is the fact that I'm most of the time plugging into my audio interface and into my digital audio workstation, and that's kind of my preferred workflow now. I've kept hold of a bunch of pedals, and they're easy to accumulate in a way, because compared to like expensive amps and expensive guitars, an expensive pedal is still, £400 or something like that. It is expensive, but it's in some ways a bit more attainable. It kind of sucked for me because I have them sitting on a shelf and almost never really turn them on, and it kind of, like the expensive guitar thing, just ended up being like a sort of a bit of a guilty weight. And I thought, well, I've got a kid, I should be more responsible than this. I don't know if that's probably just me kind of panicking about some of this stuff, and it's obviously a weird video topic, but I think quite a cool one to talk about candidly and stuff. But yeah, so that for me, this started a few years back, and I think you come to these realizations maybe through doing a lot of it, if you get what I mean. So obviously, as part of doing gear demos and reviewing gear, you have to, or you probably mostly have to have some amount of gear coming through your house, buying and selling it, and all that sort of stuff. It's only through years and years of doing that I kind of came to realize that I'm happier with slightly less gear, if that makes sense. But still, that doesn't always apply. You still get like gas for some stuff, and for me, more of it is about, if there's a new thing, being part of that release is kind of cool. But yeah, for me, like the pedal stuff, things that I don't generally use too much in my workflow. Some of them I was just keeping them because they're expensive and kind of rare, and people were paying silly prices for them. That for me didn't really sit too well with what I wanted, so I felt like that kind of sucked. And yeah, modelers kind of suck because they make everything else seem to me quite expensive, and also modelers kind of suck because the results are not always consistent, and things that sound really good for me in my studio at home with my fingers and my guitar, when other people try them, sometimes it can be a struggle, and that kind of sucks about modeling. So everything sucks. But yeah, I think most of that is kind of positive, except for heavy amps destroying spines. So thank you, Keith, for the idea, because I thought that was a really fun kind of concept. Go check out Keith's video if you haven't. His is, pretty in-depth and well thought out. Mine is not. However, I thought, there's some things that I wanted to add to that list. And if you've got things that you really love, that's awesome. For me, the heavy amps thing is like, I've got these amps here. What kind of sucks is that I love these amps, but it's not as easy to gig them as I would like because my spine is the thing. That's a kind of love-hate thing. Again, like with this amp, it's not an amp, is it? This guitar, it's just like I like it too much to gig it, even though I could replace it with something pretty similar probably, and I've got other Strats that I like, but to have an actual number one is a great thing, but at the same time like a bad thing because it won't last forever if you play it in anger. So yeah, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for stopping by. I was using Helix Native in the intro, as I often do. Maybe I'll turn on the 2 Rock. I don't know. Cheers for stopping by.